Hello everybody, this is Havoc and welcome to a bite-sized user interface tutorial. In this video, we're going to be going over your country ranking, your country's information, the resources tab, also known as capacities, and a little bit of information underneath. This should be short and sweet, but if you want to see the UI tutorial as a whole, I highly recommend that you go to the channel and click on the big heckin' long one. It'll be worth your while. So we are going to start in the upper left with your ranking. Now, if you click on your ranking, it lists all of the countries that are currently in the game. A very simple breakdown of the country, the prestige ranking or the ranking overall. Your country prestige is very important. Your GDP, which is your gross domestic product. Your standard of living, so you can see kind of how you compare to others. Lubeck is doing very, very well overall. And then of course, population with the Great Qing, the Chinese Empire, having vastly more than anyone else does. That's pretty cut and dry. I don't reference this very often, but you certainly can just to kind of see how you're doing. But note that the 4 over here means that you are rank 4, and as Austria, you start as a great power. Moving on to your country information. If you click on your flag at any time, it gives you a very brief overview of your country as a whole, from your ranking, your battalions, to your GDP, population, literacy. A lot of these things you can see in other areas, but one of the two most important things here is one, the government that you have and the interest groups that are in the government at the time. You can see their influence and how much clout they have, and also your infamy. Your infamy is a level of how other countries see you in a negative light. If you expand too often or you take more than what they think you should, you'll gain infamy and people won't like you as much, may start forming wars against you. And you can of course hover over Kaiser Ferdinand von Habsburg to get an idea of who your leader is as well. It's important to note that you don't play as this leader. It's not like Crusader Kings 3. You don't have a personal involvement. Rather, you're almost like an Illuminati, or you're kind of this being that hovers over the country as a whole. That's a brief overview of the information. Diplomacy is very important in that it lets you see at a glance what people think of you in terms of their attitude and their relations towards you. Now, those are two separate things, although they do typically go hand in hand. An attitude is, for example, Russia would consider us a desirable ally, but relations-wise, we're just cordial. That can seem a bit confusing, but there certainly is a difference between attitude and relations. Next down, we see wars, diplomatic plays. A diplomatic play includes things like pushing for an objective, like say I want to try and get Saxony. If I start a diplomatic play to want to conquer them, that will show up. But then, of course, it does other things that you might be involved in, as your interest in a region determines your ability to affect diplomatic plays. And then last, this gives an overview of your diplomatic status. Rivalries, custom unions, puppets, trade agreements, alliances overall, even dominions, things of that nature. There's a lot of things that you can briefly see what you are about and your diplomatic relations across the globe. And then last but not least in the country information tab is your modifiers. I don't look at this a whole lot. However, it does contain a lot of useful information if you're wanting to decipher some things. For instance, like cotton plantations have a throughput or an efficiency increase because you have the cotton gin. We can go down and see that the Austrian aristocracy, the landowners, have 70% political strength, and that's because of the laws of monarchy, hereditary bureaucrats, and a local police force. So those are affected by laws. So that means by default, you could remove that political strength if you were to change those laws. We'll address that in a different video, but just know that is one thing that you can do. And then this just gives you everything. I mean, every possible modifier across your country as a whole will allow you to be seen here just so you can get an idea. For instance, we have high mortality, or at least a mortality rate, because we allow children to have jobs in those interests. So just something to think about if you wanted to kind of get an overview of your country before you're wanting to start anything. Now, though, we are going to move on to capacities. There are 4 sets of capacities. I don't know if you consider money a capacity. Not necessarily. But anyways, we're going to start with bureaucracy. Bureaucracy is your ability of your government to run your country. It is not a stockpiled resource. None of these three are stockpiled resources. That means I'm not getting 168 weekly. I just have a positive balance overall. Now, your bureaucracy is generated solely from government administration and a few techs. So that's something to keep in mind. If you're running low on bureaucracy, you need to simply develop more government administrations and or develop production methods for those administration buildings. Now, bureaucracy is used up in a variety of ways. It's in your incorporated states, suck up a lot of it. You do have pops that do as well. So as your pops increase, your bureaucracy will naturally decrease. You have different laws that may, institutions rather, which we'll go into in the laws section. But note that you can increase the effectiveness of an institution at the cost of bureaucracy, and also trade routes will have a large effect. You cannot import or export without using up bureaucracy unless you're in a trade agreement. So that's a pretty good incentive. If you find that you have a lot of trade, import, export routes with a certain country, it might be worth a little bit of diplomacy to enact a trade agreement and get all of those back. And then of course, your military takes up bureaucracy as well. So all those things to consider. A positive balance in bureaucracy will give you a state construction efficiency. So you'll construct things much more efficient with, I do believe, a little bit faster is actually the technical term. The issue of negative bureaucracy is that you will actually have tax waste. You will literally be losing money if you have a negative bureaucracy, and that's not a good thing to have. So keep those in mind with bureaucracy. Next up is authority. Now, authority is interesting in that it is the grip that you have on your country to affect it as the person running your country. It is solely generated from laws and text, just like bureaucracy is. But we can see here that we currently have a lot of authority because we have some rather restrictive laws. And that's one thing you're going to need to consider, that as your country progresses, you are going to enable laws that are more progressive. Those will naturally come with less authority. So you can try and keep a hold of your nation, keep them in the old way of things, as you can imagine, but that will cost you in potential radicals or countries not seeing you in a good light. But having authority is essentially really, really good for two main things. The first one is consumption taxes. You can literally tax the people for consuming a certain good. So we can see here that even though I have a positive balance, if that were to be negative for some reason, for 500 authority, I could have a $26,000 tax on grain. Now, mind you, you are taxing people for food that they need, or any of these things are things that they need. So as a result, their standard of living will go down and it will generate radicals. So I only use consumption taxes whenever I have the need to kind of boost my economy temporarily. I would not rely on consumption taxes, no matter how profitable it might be, because it does decrease a standard of living. And like I said, increases the radicals. The other benefit of authority is decrees. And we're going to go over this in a little bit, but just as a thing real quick, we can see different things, decrees that we have. For instance, if I had a large agricultural presence in Trans-Danubia, I could encourage agricultural industries, which would increase agriculture, ranchers, and plantations efficiency by 20% at the cost of 100 authority. You can do several good things with decrees, and we're not going to go into it right now. We will address them in a little bit, but know that that's what authority is used for. We have an excess of authority right now, which means that we have a reduction in enactment time. And that simply means that a law does take time to go through the process of being enacted. A positive authority balance will give you a reduction in that time, allowing you to pass laws quicker, assuming that you have the support. One last area that authority affects, I forgot to mention this, and that's pretty daggum important, so I'm glad I didn't forget, was that you have the capability of suppressing or bolstering a interest group or an interest group. Bolstering makes them have very positive increase in attraction at the cost of 200 authority. Now suppressing is the opposite. There is a minus 40%. This is important if you have an interest group that's getting a little too powerful, or you're wanting to increase the power of another interest group to try and get them into the government and allow them to affect different laws. Next up is influence, and that is your ability to affect other countries around the world and how they look at you. Now, this is more than just that, of course, but influence is primarily generated by your rank. You can see there, because we are a great power, we actually get a lot of influence. Rivalry with Prussia gains us a lot as well, and family ties to the Austrian aristocracy, a range of things. But regardless, the influence is used for several things. And we can see some diplomatic actions like improving relations or setting up alliances, even getting in some custom union. And we can see right there that we do have 3 people already in a customs union that is kind of sucking up a little bit. But it is never a bad idea to use up your influence as much as is effective in order to shape the world around you. For instance, we have Russia and we have France are going to be our 2 biggest squeezes. We don't want to go with Prussia because we have a rivalry against them, but I have so much. Heck, I could even influence the Ottoman Empire, which isn't going to have, which doesn't really look like they like me a lot. But regardless, your influence can be used in a wide area of things to do, and it is important that you use that as much as you can to influence the world around you, because especially as a smaller country, you're going to want to build up some snuggly cuddlies with some of the bigger nations. And I think influence will be the absolute key to ensuring that. And then last of your, I won't even call this capacity, your last resource is money. And this is accumulative, positively or negatively. So we can see right here a very quick breakdown in your money tab. This gives us our balance. We are currently making 15,500 gold, whatever you want to call it, a week. We have a gold reserve limit. Currently, we have 2.73 million in gold reserves. That's basically, we have money in the bank, and we do have a limit of 5.46. So that means we have a lot of wiggle room before we even start to get into debt. And we'll look at the debt ceiling here in just a little bit, whenever we get over to the left panels. But know that there are benefits to kind of living in debt, assuming that you don't have a major crisis on your hands. Your investment pool is your upper strata people's ability to invest in the businesses that they own. All of your buildings, unless they are government run, are going to be in the public sector. And that means that the public, if they have extra cash, they can invest in that opportunity. This is very important because depending on your laws, you will be able to utilize that investment pool for certain buildings. For instance, I played a United States run in which I enabled the laws of the investment pool to affect agriculture and infrastructure, and there were a ton of investors investing in that pool. I had several million in gold or in investment pool money, and therefore I was able to build several agricultural buildings and build up a bunch of railways that I actually did not pay for myself that came out of that investment pool. Figuring out how to get your pops to invest is the best way to save money and the best way to figure out the infrastructure of your country and how it progresses forward. Below that, we see your national revenue and your expenses. This is a list of different revenue and expenses. You'll notice here that income tax is going to be one of the bigger ones, as well as poll taxes. These will change based on your laws and based on your budgeting. We'll go over that in just a little bit with its own tutorial. But you can also see that your goods and your wages for your government and your military are your largest expenses. The best way that you can reduce that is to reduce the cost of those resources. Something we'll get to later on, or hopefully you can figure out on your own. And then of course you see your balance in gold reserves. If we had continued on, you would see the progression. Doesn't really matter right now, but know that this is your money tab. Those are your top line resources. And below here is a toggleable set of resources as well. I leave it locked on simply because it allows me to have a quick reference guide. We're going to go over it very, very briefly. For one, you have your gross domestic product, your GDP. We can see we are currently number 7 worldwide. Your literacy rate. This is important to me because it allows you to kind of see your country progressing towards a literate rate. Literacy is very important. It helps your technology spread. It actually politically activates your population. So the more literate they are, the more they are going to be invested into the political system. And so it just gives you a good idea. If you're kind of seeing over time that this is progressing forwards, then you're probably in a good spot unless you're playing a weird run. Your standard of living is important. It is very important. It basically lets you know how well your pops are living. Right now, 11.3 on average across all of your population is not good. It is impoverished. Now, there are ways we can increase this. I'm not going over that right at this moment, but know that this is a good thing to keep locked up there so you can see how it is being affected by changes within your country, changes within the market, changes within your pops. Because as you gain that, you're going to have a better standard of living, you're going to have more money, you're going to have a better overall quality of life for your country, not just for the pops living in it. This, of course, is population. We can have a 0.13 pop growth across the board, which is netting us 47,500 pops every year. It's not fantastic, but it's not terrible either. And then lastly, your radicals and your loyalists. This is important to me because if you see a very sudden jump in your radicals, there's no other quick and easy reference way to see that number than by hovering over the radicals guide. And that will basically give you an idea. Okay, I'm passing a law. Oh wow, suddenly I have 100% more radicals than I did before. May not be the best time to enact that law. Loyalists, I'm not gonna lie. I mean, the tooltip says that they're pleased with their country and willing to defend it. The approval of interest groups supported by loyalist pops is improved. I haven't seen the direct effects of this per se, and only in 2 of my runs have I seen my loyalists outnumber my radicals, despite it seeming like that's the way the country wants to go. But still, it goes side and side. You can't toggle each of these individuals off. So that's not something that you really have to worry about. One thing to mention that I just saw over here is that by hovering over your GDP, I didn't see this before, but you are able to see your infrastructure levels as well as unemployed pops and the different level of apparently only peasants available to you. So peasants, for instance, only work on subsistence farms. It's a little sidetracking here. So to get them out and into the workforce, you'll have to develop your agriculture or find ways to get rid of arable land. So this is a good idea. I can reference my GDP right here and be like, oh, okay, cool. My Trans-Danubia, yeah, I actually said that right, has a lot of infrastructure available to it. I should use that when I go to build things. So just keep that in mind across those bars. The last 2 things we're going to briefly look at is your current situation and then other notifications, as I call them. Your current situation allows you to see several things in your empire that you may want to address. For me, I don't need to know this, and I don't need to know unused construction capacity. I can see that over there, and we'll look at it in a minute. These are important things to note. And this is kind of the deal with the current situation. It'll say, hey, you need to tax your people more efficiently. Or, hey, government goods are expensive. Or, hey, oh, I don't know, you're about to have a revolution. Things of that nature really show some unproductive trade routes is another one. Just gives you little tidbits of information that you may want to address. It's not stuff that you're constantly pestered about, but just know that it's going to be there. And then the last part of this section is going to be your other notifications. This will include things like no active research, if you have armies that don't have a front assigned to them, if your armies are taking heavy attrition, if you're about to have a revolution, things of that nature. It's just kind of important. Oh crap, you should address this. I will say that there will be events that occur on the right side of the screen that I wish would pop up here because I don't tend to see this right side. That's a little user interface, user experience feedback that I would give. But regardless, this is going to give you a good idea of things that you need to immediately attend to. And that will wrap up this section of the top user interface, your capacities, your country, modifiers, and then of course your situational kind of awareness. This is a really good overview of your empire as a whole. And so it's essential that you figure it out and you learn it and you figure out how to use it correctly. Thank you so much for watching this video. I do hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to check out either the UI tutorial as a whole or more of the little snippets as they appear on the channel. Thank you so much for watching. This is Havoc, and I'll see you in the next one.